The world was peaceful, calm, and quiet, untouched by any outside forces. Earth, as it had been for centuries, spun in the vastness of space, its inhabitants living in their own routines. People woke up each day, went to work, spent time with their families, and went to sleep unaware that the universe had its own plans. Little did they know that everything was about to change in a way no one could imagine. It started as a whisper, a strange signal from the depths of space, faint but persistent. No one on Earth took it seriously at first. Governments brushed it off, scientists were baffled, and most of the population remained clueless. But then, the whispers grew louder and louder, until they could no longer be ignored. It wasn't a natural event. It wasn't just static on a radio frequency. It was a warning. The arrival of an alien race. At first, the people of Earth were curious. Some thought it was an advanced signal from another human civilization, maybe even a chance to meet an ally. The excitement and curiosity filled the air. Could it be possible that humanity wasn't alone in the universe? The thought alone was thrilling, but that excitement quickly turned into fear when they learned the true nature of the visitors. The day the ships arrived will forever be etched into the memories of those who witnessed it. Massive, sleek, and powerful, they appeared out of nowhere, piercing the sky like a dagger aimed at Earth's heart. Their ships were unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Huge, metallic, and black, they glistened under the sun, as if to show their superiority. The sky was filled with their presence, and no one knew whether to run, hide, or face what was coming. People on the streets stopped in their tracks, staring up in disbelief. Was this the end of the world, or was it the beginning of something they could never have imagined? As the alien ships descended, the Earth's military forces were put on high alert. Governments scrambled to respond, but it quickly became clear that their weapons were no match for the invaders. The aliens had technology far beyond anything humanity had developed. Earth's defenses fell without a fight, and the world stood frozen, watching in terror as the invaders made their intentions clear. They were here to take control, to take what was theirs. And what they wanted was humanity itself. The alien race, known only to Earth as the Zerk, had come to conquer, but their purpose was not to destroy the planet. No, their goal was far more chilling. They came for slaves. At first, the people of Earth couldn't believe it. Slaves. But as the Zerk began to make their demands, it became clear. They had advanced technology, yes, but they didn't need warships to wipe out humanity. They didn't need to burn the cities or raze the lands. All they needed was to break humanity's spirit. All they needed was to make Earth's population bow to their will. And so, the Zerk began rounding up humans. They did it. They took the young, the strong, the smart, and the skilled, anyone who could serve their needs. No one was safe. The aliens' grip tightened around Earth, and those who tried to resist found themselves swiftly subdued. The first few days were the hardest. People were confused. Some thought it was a nightmare. Others thought it might be a bad dream they would wake up from, but reality was far crueler. The aliens showed no mercy, and soon, entire cities were under their control. Humanity's leaders were powerless against the alien forces, and any attempt to fight back was quickly squashed. But even in the darkest times, a spark of resistance began to glow. It started with small acts of defiance, with groups of people, secretly meeting, planning, and strategizing. It was the human spirit, their refusal to be subjugated, that would ignite the fire of resistance. They had been pushed to the edge, but Earth's inhabitants weren't about to go quietly into the night. The aliens, in their arrogance, had underestimated one critical thing: the power of human will. What they saw as a weak, divided species was, in fact, far stronger than they realized. For every slave they took, another person stood up. For every inch they gained, humans fought back with everything they had. The aliens came to Earth expecting an easy conquest, but they found a species far tougher than they could have imagined. The Zerk may have had advanced weapons and technology, but they hadn't accounted for the one thing they could never take: the determination to survive, the drive to fight, and the unwillingness to be enslaved. This was not just the story of an alien invasion. This was the story of Earth's fight for survival. It was the story of how humanity, though small in comparison to the vastness of the universe, would rise to challenge the most powerful invaders they had ever faced. The Zerk came seeking to dominate, but they were about to learn the hardest lesson of all: never underestimate humanity. As the ships hovered above the Zayak's plans began to unfold, but they couldn't shake the growing realization that what they thought would be an easy conquest was about to become their greatest regret. The battle for Earth had just begun, and neither side knew how it would end. But one thing was certain, the Zerk would never forget the day they underestimated humanity. The clock was ticking. The aliens had come for slaves, but humanity would show them something far worse than submission. The massive ships loomed over Earth like shadows cast by giants, blocking out the sun as they descended into the atmosphere. Their sleek, dark surfaces gleamed in the sunlight, exuding an air of power and invincibility. For those who watched from the ground, it felt as though time itself had come to a standstill. The sight of these invaders was unlike anything humanity had ever seen before. They didn't come in the way movies had taught people to expect. There were no bright, flashing lasers or explosions from the sky. Instead, there was an eerie silence that seemed to wrap itself around the entire world. When the ships first appeared, people thought it was some sort of government test, an aircraft or satellite, but the government had no answers, and soon enough, the news confirmed what everyone feared. These were not human-made, these were alien vessels, and they were here to stay. The panic began almost immediately. People crowded the streets, looking to the skies for answers, their eyes wide with fear. It didn't take long before the world's military forces were mobilized, but nothing could prepare them for the sheer scale of the threat. Fighter jets, missiles, and defense systems were all deployed, but they were like ants attacking a mountain. The invaders did not react. They did not defend themselves. They simply watched as Earth's forces made their futile attempt. Each missile launched at them evaporated before it even came close to making contact. Each fighter jet that attempted a counterattack was brought down before it even had a chance to fire its weapons. The alien ships were like moving fortresses, immovable and unbreakable. On the ground, chaos spread like wildfire. People tried to escape, but where could they go? Earth's cities, once bustling with life, became ghost towns as the alien ships hovered above, casting a dark shadow over everything below. Governments scrambled to issue statements, but the situation was quickly spiraling beyond anyone's control. Then, just as quickly as the ships arrived, the Zerk, the alien species, made their intentions clear. They didn't come to Earth with weapons raised in anger. They came for something far more chilling. They came for slaves. The message was broadcasted everywhere. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Earth's governments were powerless. They had no option but to comply, or face complete annihilation. At first, many thought it was a bluff. After all, who could believe that an alien race had come all the way across the universe just to take humans as slaves? But the reality was far worse. The Zerk made their moves calmly, without haste. They didn't need to launch an all-out war. They had already won, and they knew it. Humanity tried to fight back. It was only natural. For a brief moment, there was hope. Groups of resistance fighters emerged from the shadows. Some were former soldiers, others were civilians, but all of them shared one thing: a desire to stand against the alien invaders. They raided small alien encampments, sabotaged communication lines, and struck when they could. But their efforts were like a whisper against the thunder. The aliens crushed each resistance movement with brutal efficiency, showing no mercy or regard for human life. For every group of brave souls that rose up, dozens more fell. The Zerk, with their superior technology, didn't need to fight in the traditional sense. They didn't need to destroy everything in their path. They simply made their presence felt. They had ships that could neutralize entire battalions with a single pulse of energy. They had weapons that could render any human helpless with a single touch. Yet, despite this overwhelming power, something started to change. It was subtle, at first, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. The people of Earth began to realize that, despite all the technology, the power, and the force of the Zerk, there was one thing the aliens couldn't control: the human spirit. Even when the humans were enslaved, when they were made to kneel before the invaders, they fought on in the hidden corners of Earth. A new kind of resistance began to form. It wasn't based on weapons or advanced technology. It was based on something far more dangerous to the Zerk. It was based on unity. The resistance was small at first, just whispers between survivors, but it grew. People who had once been frightened now found a sense of purpose. The longer the Zerk ruled, the more humanity's resolve strengthened. They might have been enslaved, but they would not be broken. Meanwhile, the Zerk looked on, oblivious to the growing rebellion. They had come to Earth to enslave, not to destroy. They thought that their superior technology and power would be enough to quash any hope, any defiance, any resistance. But the one thing they failed to understand was that while they could imprison the body, they could never imprison the mind. The alien race had made a fatal mistake. They underestimated humanity's ability to endure. They thought Earth's people were weak, scattered, and easy to control. But they were wrong. As the days passed, the alien forces began to notice something strange. The humans, despite their suffering, were not giving up. They were learning, they were adapting. And in the darkest corners of the world, whispers of a new plan began to spread. Earth would not bow, Earth would rise. And that was when the real battle began. The fight for Earth's freedom wasn't going to be easy. It would take everything the humans had, every ounce of their strength and cunning. But one thing was certain. It was going to be a fight the Zerk would never forget. The aliens had come for slaves, but what they didn't know was that they were about to face a force they couldn't control: humanity's will to survive. The first whispers of rebellion began to spread like wildfire, fueled by small, quiet acts of defiance. At first, they were nothing more than rumor stories of human survivors striking back in the shadows, of small victories against the overwhelming alien forces. But soon, those whispers began to take shape. The Zerk, confident in their superior strength, dismissed these actions as mere nuisances. They believed that humanity's spirit could be broken, that fear would soon silence all resistance. But what the Zerk didn't understand was that for every person they enslaved, for every city they destroyed, the human resolve only grew stronger. The resistance was born not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet corners of Earth, in the hearts of those who refused to give in. The first acts were simple: sabotaged supply lines, stolen weapons, stolen technology. These were the small sparks that ignited a fire. The people who began to form the core of the resistance were ordinary citizens, from every corner of the globe. There were teachers, farmers, doctors, engineers, and even children, all bound by one singular goal: freedom. At first, the resistance was disorganized. They had no clear leader, no strategic military strength. They were simply a collection of people who refused to accept their fate. They met in secret, in abandoned buildings, dark alleys, or under the cover of night. Every meeting was a risk, but every victory, no matter how small, brought them closer to their goal. They began to understand the alien technology better, adapting it to their own needs. The Zerk had made one fatal error. They had underestimated the creativity and resilience of the human mind. One night, as the resistance cells gathered in secret locations, the first real plan came together. It wasn't some large-scale offensive, not yet, but it was something. A few hundred people, armed with stolen Zerk tech and a few old-fashioned weapons, managed to break into an alien supply depot, capturing vital resources. The Zerk had assumed that humans could never work together in such large numbers, that their chaos would never allow them to organize. But what they didn't realize was that humans were capable of incredible cooperation, even under the most desperate of circumstances. The battle for the depot was quick and brutal, but the humans emerged victorious. Their Brazilian weapons and technology was crucial to their survival. After that, the resistance gained momentum. They began to form alliances with other groups, establishing a network of survivors spread across the planet. It was still dangerous to communicate openly, and the Zerk continued to hunt down anyone suspected of being part of the resistance. But the human spirit couldn't be contained. Every victory, no matter how small, was broadcasted through secret channels, making the world aware that Earth was not giving up without a fight. The Zerk watched from their ships, growing frustrated. They had never seen anything like it before. Humanity wasn't crumbling under their might, was adapting, and with each passing day, the resistance was becoming stronger, more organized, and more deadly. The Zayek's attempt to control Earth was slipping through their fingers, but they still had the upper hand. They had advanced technology, control over the skies, and their vast numbers, but they were not prepared for what was coming next. Then, the turning point came. One fateful night, the resistance managed to infiltrate a high-security Zerk base, capturing several high-ranking officials and extracting critical information. Among the prisoners was a Zerk commander, someone who held vital knowledge about the aliens' plans and their weaknesses. The resistance, now realizing the full scope of their enemy's strength and strategy, began to plan their next move with precision. No longer were they a ragtag group of survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with. The commander they captured was not the first alien to be taken prisoner, but he was different. His knowledge of the Zayek's advanced systems, including their central command network, made him an invaluable asset to the resistance. For the first time, humanity had leverage, and with it, they were able to strike a deal. The Zerk commander, having witnessed the unrelenting will of humans firsthand, offered them a chance: join the Zerk Empire and live under their rule, or face complete annihilation. But the resistance leader, a former soldier who had once been part of Earth's military, knew that there could be no compromise. He understood the consequences of giving in, of allowing humanity to live under alien rule. It wasn't just about freedom, it was about survival. So, they refused the commander's offer. Instead, they saw the opportunity for something greater, to take the fight to the Zerk themselves. In that moment, the resistance transformed from a group of rebels into an organized, determined army. Using the knowledge extracted from the commander, they launched their first large-scale offensive strike against a Zerk supply ship in Earth's orbit. The battle was fierce, the casualties high, but it was a success. Humanity had taken their first major victory. The aliens had come to Earth expecting easy control, expecting fear to do their work for them, but they were learning the hard way: humans would never bow. With the success of the strike, the Resistance's reputation grew, and their numbers swelled. More and more people from all walks of life joined the cause. The world, once on the brink of despair, began to come alive again. But the Zerk were not done. They knew that if the humans were left unchecked, they could become a serious threat. They retaliated, sending a massive fleet to Earth's surface, hoping to squash the rebellion once and for all. But the Resistance was ready. They had learned from their past mistakes. With their new knowledge and technology, they had developed a strategy that would challenge the Zerk's overwhelming power. The first major battle between the Resistance and the Zerk was about to begin, and neither side was willing to back down. What the Zerk didn't know was that the war for Earth was no longer a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future, and humans would never stop fighting until the final breath. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a fiery orange glow across the battlefield. The sky, once serene and peaceful, now seemed to tremble with the weight of the impending war. For the first time, humanity stood on the brink of true victory, but also faced the harsh reality of the battle that would define their future. The Zerk had underestimated them, but this final confrontation was going to push both sides to their limits. It was no longer a war of survival. It was a war for everything: freedom, hope, and the future of Earth itself. The Resistance, having learned from their previous victories, now had the upper hand in knowledge and technology. They had adapted the alien technology they'd stolen over the months into a powerful weaponry system. Their forces were no longer a scattered group of rebels, but a united army with a singular purpose. They had their own fleet now, the same kind of sleek, intimidating ships the Zerk had used, but theirs were filled with humanity's ingenuity. The Zerk's once feared ships now seemed like an enemy to be conquered, not a conqueror to fear. The moment the Zerk fleet appeared in Earth's atmosphere, a wave of dread swept through the Resistance fighters. They had fought hard, they had bled, but this was different. This was the moment that would decide everything. The Resistance knew that this battle could mean their victory, but they also knew that the stakes had never been higher. If they lost, Earth would fall, and humanity's fight for freedom would be over. The Zerk would reign supreme, and the entire human race would become nothing more than slaves. As the alien ships lined up in the sky like dark sentinels, a chilling silence fell over the battlefield. The Resistance fighters, hidden in their bunkers and makeshift bases, knew they had to act. They couldn't afford to hesitate. As the first pulse of energy crackled across the battlefield, a signal was sent. The Resistance launched their counterattack. The first wave of humanity's ships surged forward, their engines roaring with the sound of defiance. They shot through the sky, weaving in and out of the Zerk's formations. Despite their overwhelming numbers, the Zerk were not prepared for the humanity's rapid adaptability. They hadn't expected the Resistance to be able to use their own technology against them so effectively. The alien fleet was disrupted, their formations scattered as the human fighters rained down fire from all directions. The air was thick with energy blasts, the ground shaking with the force of the battle. But the Zerk were not easily defeated. They fought back with relentless precision, their weapons slicing through the air, their ships dodging and retaliating. With a deadly accuracy, the humans, despite their ingenuity, were still outmatched in terms of raw firepower. Their ships lacked the alien fleet's armor, and their weapons had not yet been perfected. For every Zerk ship that fell, it felt like 2 or 3 more replaced it. The odds seemed insurmountable, and for a moment, it seemed like the Resistance might falter. But then, a shift occurred. Amidst the chaos, the Resistance fighters found their rhythm. They began to anticipate the Zerk's moves, using their knowledge of alien technology and tactics to their advantage. It was no longer just about brute force, it was about strategy, adaptability, and the unwavering human will to survive. The Resistance knew that they couldn't win this battle through strength alone. They had to outsmart their enemies. One by one, the Zerk's ships began to falter. Their advanced systems were disrupted by the new human technology, and their once imposing fleet began to show cracks. The resistance, despite their smaller numbers, began to turn the tide. The Gaiac's own arrogance, the belief that they were untouchable, was their downfall. They had never expected humanity to fight back with such force, such intelligence. As the battle waged on, the resistance began to target the core of the Zerg fleet, their command center. If they could disable it, they could cripple the alien army, but reaching it would be no easy task. The Zerg had placed their most powerful defenses around the command center, and only the bravest of the resistance would be able to reach it. In the midst of the battle, one resistance leader, a former soldier whose name had become known to both allies and enemies, led the charge. With his team, he broke through the alien defenses, weaving through the enemy ships with a deadly precision. His heart pounded as he neared the core, the Gaiac's weaponry sending shockwaves through the atmosphere, but his focus never wavered. This was the moment they had been waiting for. As they breached the final line of defense, the resistance leader and his team stormed the heart of the Gaiac's command ship. The Zerg commander, who had once been so confident in their domination, now found himself facing the undeniable truth: his empire was crumbling. The resistance had arrived at the core, and with a single strike, the Gaiac's hold over Earth would be shattered. But it wasn't an easy victory. As they made their way through the heart of the ship, they faced the Gaiac's fiercest defenders. The aliens fought with desperation, knowing that this was their last stand. For every step the humans took, the Zerg took one in retaliation. The battle was fierce, and lives were lost on both sides. Finally, the moment arrived. The resistance leader, standing face to face with the Zerg commander, made the final blow. The Zerg's control center was destroyed. The alien fleet, now leaderless and confused, began to disintegrate. The humans, though exhausted and battered, had won. The battle for Earth was over, but the cost had been great, and the scars of war would never fade. The Zerg had come to Earth expecting to enslave humanity. Instead, they had met their match. Earth had fought back, and though the victory was hard-earned, it was humanity's victory. It was the beginning of a new chapter where Earth would never again be underestimated, and the human spirit would always prevail. The Zerg had come for Earth, but they had left nothing but regret. The dust of battle settled slowly over the once bustling cities, now scarred by the chaos of war. Silence fell over the Earth like a heavy blanket, but it was a silence that spoke volumes. The victory had come at an immense cost, and though the Zerg had been pushed back, the future of humanity was uncertain. The resistance had succeeded, but now they faced a new challenge, rebuilding what had been broken, and facing a world that was forever changed. In the days following the final battle, Earth's survivors began to emerge from the ruins. Cities that had once been the symbols of humanity's progress were now just memories, their glass towers reduced to rubble. The world had witnessed destruction, on a scale never before imagined, and the scars of war were deep, not just in the land, but in the hearts of those who remained. Yet amidst the ruins, there was something else: hope. The Zerg had underestimated humanity in every way possible. They thought that Earth was just another world to conquer, another planet to add to their growing empire. But what they hadn't counted on was the resilience of a species that had survived millennia of its own struggles. The Zerg came expecting to crush the spirit of humanity, but instead, they had unleashed something they could never control. The people of Earth stood together, united in their shared victory. It wasn't just the resistance fighters who had contributed. It was every person who had dared to defy the alien invaders. From the smallest acts of rebellion to the largest coordinated strikes. It was the survivors who had fought to protect their families, their homes, their way of life. Earth's victory wasn't just the work of soldiers, it was the work of humanity as a whole. But now, as the dust settled, humanity faced its most difficult task: rebuilding. There were no governments, no established systems. The old world was gone, and a new one had to be forged from the ashes. The cities were in ruins, the infrastructure was shattered, and countless lives had been lost. The aliens, once so sure of their control, had left their mark on Earth, and it was up to the survivors to piece everything back together. The first step was survival. The people of Earth needed to come together, to heal, to rebuild the basics. Food, water, and shelter were the immediate priorities, but even that felt like a daunting task. The resistance fighters, now the leaders of this new world, knew that they had to create a sense of order from the chaos. They didn't have the luxury of time. With the alien threat gone, Earth's people were left to face the mess they had inherited. In the heart of the broken cities, a new kind of leadership began to emerge. It wasn't about power or control. It was about collaboration, trust, and healing. The soldiers, the engineers, the doctors, and the survivors all came together, pooling their resources and knowledge to start the painstaking process of rebuilding. They didn't have much to work with, but what they had was enough: determination, hope, and the will to rebuild a world they had almost lost. But the scars of the war went deeper than just the physical destruction. The memory of the invasion haunted everyone. The faces of the fallen, the loved ones lost in the chaos, would never be forgotten. Even in the moments of rebuilding, there was a profound sadness that lingered in the air. Earth had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and the cost of victory was far greater than anyone had imagined. The survivors could rebuild their cities, but they would never forget the price they had paid. Yet even in this sorrow, there was something that could not be erased. It was the strength of humanity. The victory against the jerk had proven one thing beyond a doubt: humanity was not a species to be underestimated. For all their flaws, for all their divisions, humans had shown the universe that they could overcome anything. The jerk had come for slaves, but what they found instead was a force they could never defeat. In the aftermath, as Earth began to rebuild, there were whispers of other civilizations watching, learning from Earth's victory. The jerk had been just one of many races scattered across the universe, and now, the universe knew that Earth was not a planet to be with. Humanity's victory was more than just a turning point in Earth's history. It was a message to the stars. The alien races that once saw Earth as weak, as insignificant, now had to rethink their assumptions. Earth had proven that it could fight back, and not just with weapons, but with its heart and soul. But as Earth started to rebuild, there were questions. What would happen next? The jerk may have been defeated, but what about the other alien races? What would become of the technology the Resistance had uncovered? Would Earth be ready for the next battle? The new leaders of Earth knew they couldn't afford to be complacent. The fight for Earth's future was far from over. In the years that followed, Earth's people began to learn from the remnants of the Gaiax technology. They didn't just rebuild, they advanced. What had once been a world on the brink of collapse was now a world poised for a new era of growth, exploration, and, perhaps, even the eventual exploration of the stars. The jerk had come seeking slaves, but they had left behind something far more dangerous to them: a united humanity, stronger and more determined than ever before. As the Earth began to heal, the people moved forward with a new understanding. They had been tested in ways that no one could have predicted, and they had passed. The victory over the jerk had been hard-earned, but it was a victory that had changed the course of history. And as humanity rebuilt, they did so with a new resolve. No one, no matter how advanced, would ever underestimate Earth again. The weeks following the victory were a blur of reconstruction and reflection. The streets that had once been filled with the deafening sounds of chaos now echoed with the quieter, more solemn noise of rebuilding. The dust of the alien invasion still hung in the air, but the resilience of humanity began to shine through. What had once seemed impossible, surviving the jerk and pushing them back, was now the foundation upon which a new world would be built. But even in this new hope, there were still dark shadows that clung to the survivors, reminding them of what had been lost. The resistance fighters, once warriors on the front lines, had become the leaders of this fragile new world. They were the ones who had fought tooth and nail, losing comrades and friends, all while refusing to let Earth fall to the invaders. Now, they were tasked with the even more daunting job of bringing the broken world together. There was no map for this kind of recovery, no guidebook for a species that had been brought to its knees, only to rise again. The question lingered: could humanity truly rebuild, or would they fall back into the mistakes of the past? In the midst of the destruction, there were small signs of progress. The first power plants came back online. The lights flickered on. In small pockets across the globe, people began to gather in communities, piecing together lives that had been torn apart. For many, the process of rebuilding wasn't just about brick and mortar. It was about healing the spirit. They had fought against the jerk for survival, but now, they fought for something deeper, reclaiming the human experience that had been stolen from them. But not everyone felt the same sense of hope. The scars of war ran deep, not just in the cities, but in the hearts of the survivors. Grief weighed heavily on every face, in every city. Families mourned loved ones lost to the alien invasion. The streets were quieter than they had ever been, filled with people who walked slowly, their eyes haunted by the memories of the battles they had fought and the lives that had been taken. How could anyone forget what they had endured? One survivor, a young woman whose family had been lost during the early stages of the invasion, wandered through the remnants of her hometown. The once beautiful skyline was now a jagged silhouette of steel and concrete scars of a war that had ravaged everything in its path. She could still see her childhood home in the distance, a shell of what it had once been. The memories of her family, the warmth of their laughter, the comfort of home, seemed like distant dreams. It was a reminder of what Earth had almost lost, what they were trying so desperately to reclaim. Yet, as humanity struggled with its grief, there was also a quiet but growing optimism. The alien technology that had been acquired during the invasion was being used to accelerate the rebuilding process. Cities that had been reduced to rubble began to rise again, this time stronger, more advanced. New energy sources were being harnessed, old technologies were being revitalized, and the world began to take on a new shape, one that had been influenced by the alien technology that had once been their oppressors. The knowledge the jerk had left behind was now being used for humanity's benefit. But even as humanity rebuilt, there was an undercurrent of anxiety. No one knew if the Zerg were truly gone for good. Earth had won this battle, but the universe was vast, and the Zerg were only one of many races that existed beyond the stars. Was this just the beginning of a new chapter of conflict? Would other alien species come to Earth, seeking to finish what the Zerg had started? It was a question that weighed heavily on the minds of Earth's leaders. There was no denying the victory over the Zerg, but there was also the reality that their victory might only be temporary. The universe was a dangerous place, and Earth was no longer the quiet, isolated planet it had once been. The jerk had made Earth a target, and they wouldn't be the last. As Earth's new leaders gathered in makeshift councils, they began to make plans. Their world had been shattered, but now they had to think about the future. The alien technology they had salvaged was both a blessing and a curse. It gave them power, but it also made them vulnerable. The Zerg had come to Earth with their superior technology, and now humanity had access to it. But what if another, more powerful alien species came next? Would Earth be ready? The question haunted them as they made plans for defense, for the future. Humanity had always looked to the stars, dreaming of exploration and adventure. Now, those dreams were tinged with uncertainty. No longer were the stars simply a symbol of wonder, they had become a reminder of the threat that lay beyond them. Planet Earth had won this battle, but the war for survival was far from over. And yet, there was something else, a quiet strength that had emerged in the aftermath of the war. Despite the uncertainty, despite the scars, humanity had proven something crucial to themselves. They had shown the universe that they would never give up. They had faced the most powerful alien species to ever set foot on their world and had sent them running. The spirit of Earth, of humanity, was unbreakable. The rebuilding process continued, but now it was driven by something deeper. It wasn't just about restoring cities or rebuilding economies. It was about rebuilding humanity's sense of purpose. Earth had been through a trial by fire, and though the scars remained, they had forged something stronger in the process. They had proven to themselves that, no matter what came next, they could face it. They were survivors, and they had earned the right to thrive once more. As Earth's people moved forward, they knew they had just scratched the surface of what lay ahead. The fight was not over, but for the first time in history, Earth stood united, not just in survival, but in the belief that they had the strength to face whatever came next. The Zerg had come seeking slaves, but they had left with the bitter taste of regret, because humanity had proven something they never expected. They were far more than just survivors. They were a force the universe would never forget. The days following the final battle were a strange mix of quiet and chaos. The Earth had been scarred by the alien invasion, its surface marked by the conflict that had nearly torn everything apart. Yet, amid the ruins, something new was emerging, stronger, more unified, and filled with an undeniable sense of purpose. Humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction, but it had risen from the ashes, determined to rebuild and protect what it had fought so hard to preserve. It wasn't just the physical restoration of cities or the rebuilding of infrastructures that drove the survivors. It was the collective resolve to ensure that Earth would never again be vulnerable to the threats of the universe. The aliens had come for slaves, but in doing so they had awakened a strength in humanity that no one, not even the most powerful of invaders, could have anticipated. Earth was no longer the naive, isolated world it once was. It was a beacon of defiance, a symbol of resistance. The survivors had learned a hard truth. The universe was vast, and it was filled with dangers beyond anything humanity had ever imagined. The Zerg, though defeated, were not the only threat. The stars that once seemed like distant dreams now seemed to loom over Earth with an ominous weight. The galaxy was filled with countless other species, some of which might have been watching. the battle unfold on Earth? What if they came next? What if Earth's victory had made it a target, not just for one alien race, but for many? For the first time in history, Earth began to look outward, no longer focusing solely on itself. The battle had united humanity in ways that would have seemed impossible just months before. People from every corner of the world, regardless of race or background, had come together to fight for their future. Now, they faced the daunting task of securing that future. The leaders of the new world were not just military commanders or politicians, they were the survivors, the people who had stood firm in the face of unimaginable odds. They were the ones who had fought for their homes, their families, their planet. And now they were tasked with something even more difficult, ensuring that Earth would remain free from the shadow of alien conquest. It wasn't going to be easy. The aliens had left behind technology that could help humanity, but it was also a double-edged sword. While it gave the survivors new tools to build, it also made them more vulnerable. There were still pockets of alien technology scattered across Earth, and some of it was beyond human understanding. The Zerg had been careful to hide the most dangerous of their weapons. But there was always the possibility that something had been overlooked. Something that could still be used to bring about Earth's downfall. The most pressing issue, however, was not just the alien technology or the threat of other races. It was the future of humanity itself. The Zerg had come to Earth with the expectation that they could break humanity's spirit, that they could crush its will to fight and subjugate it to their will. But in doing so, they had underestimated the very thing that made humanity unique, its ability to adapt, to fight, and to rise against overwhelming odds. Now, as Earth began to rebuild, the survivors knew that they couldn't just return to the way things were. They couldn't go back to living in ignorance, isolated from the rest of the universe. The Zerg had shown them that Earth was a target, that there were forces out there willing to do whatever it took to control their world. Humanity had to be prepared for the next wave, for whatever might come next. They had to become a force that could protect itself not just from the Zerg, but from any threat the universe could throw at them. So, the survivors began to build just new cities or new governments, but a new world order. They began to work together to form an alliance, a united front that could defend Earth from any future threats. They knew that this wouldn't be easy, that it would take years, maybe even generations, to fully recover from the war and secure the planet. But they also knew that they couldn't afford to wait. The universe was vast, and Earth had just made its presence known. The first steps were small, but significant. Humanity's best minds came together to study the alien technology that had been left behind, to understand it, and to ensure that it could never be used against them again. The survivors knew they had to be cautious. Some of the technology was too advanced, too dangerous to be left unchecked. But they also knew that this knowledge could help them prepare for whatever came next. At the same time, Earth began to look beyond its own borders. For the first time in history, humanity was working together as a single entity, with no nations or divisions between them. The old rivalries, the old conflicts, seemed petty now in the face of the greater threat. The survivors began to share resources, to pool their knowledge and their strength. They knew that their survival depended on their ability to work together not just as individual nations, but as one unified planet. In the midst of all this, there was a sense of unease. The people of Earth had survived, but they knew that survival alone wasn't enough. They had to thrive, they had to evolve, they had to become stronger, smarter, and more resilient if they were to face the challenges that lay ahead. They couldn't let their victory over the Zerg be a fleeting triumph. They had to build on it, to turn it into a foundation for the future. And so, humanity moved forward, not with the arrogance of a species that had defeated its enemies, but with the humility of a species that had come to understand the true cost of survival. The universe was vast, and humanity had only just begun to explore it. The Zerg had been just one enemy in a galaxy full of possibilities, both good and bad. The fight for Earth was not over. The fight for humanity's future had only just begun. But there was one thing the people of Earth knew for sure: they would never again be taken by surprise. The stars might be a vast and dangerous place, but Earth was ready to defend itself, to survive, and to thrive.